We're talking about a few key ingredients to successful planning for next year today on the Church Revitalization Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malfers Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Matthew.
Welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast. My name is Scott Ball. I'm joined by my friend and co-host, AJ Matthew. AJ, it's November when we're recording this episode, and depending on your church, you may already have done some planning for next year. You may be thinking, I'm not going to be planning for next year until next year. You may, everyone's going to be all over the map. And I know that with Christmas just around the corner, trying to get all of that squared away, thinking about 2024 might sound like a bridge too far. But now is a great time. If you haven't already started thinking about planning for the new year, this little bit of a gap before you get into the crazy, hectic Christmas Advent season would be a good time to pull back with your team for a day maybe and do some planning for next year. And we want to give you some tips to help you plan for growth and improvement in the new year.
Yeah. I think leaders and teams that they've for many years have been in the habit and the rhythm of planning, maybe are more likely to start earlier, in the current year. And those that are maybe a little bit more new to, some longer range strategic planning, might do a little bit closer to the beginning or maybe even after the first of the year.
Yeah.
Our perspective, Scott, is that it's never too late to start to make a plan. So we're always happy to encourage and support. So whether it's June next year and you're like, you know what, we really should plan for the rest of this year, we're happy to support you in that.
For sure.
Because we just think it's a good idea no matter when you decide to do it.
Yeah, on that note, we tell churches all the time, our goal is that strategic planning becomes a habit rather than a moment. And so, getting into that rhythm of planning strategically, which is maybe a good segue here. I want to talk about some lessons that we've learned in the past. The thing about planning is you really shouldn't plan too much more than a year in advance. Here's a good reason, or maybe like a little example of a small thing. So AJ, you and I every year, I say every year, we've gone twice. We're going next year to work with the International Baptist Convention at their leadership conference next March, and we've gone these past two Marches, and we'll be there this March. We got the date, the details of where it's going to be and when it's going to be earlier, so we were able to plan ahead for our travel. But I got an email this morning, AJ, that my flight home from Europe was canceled, or I got booted off it, or I don't know exactly what happened. So I'm having to figure that out. I don't regret planning ahead, but the further out you plan, the more likely things are going to have to change. And so planning in 1 year stretches is good. Having a vision that's further out than that is great, but we would caution you. I see churches sometimes, AJ, we did this 5-year plan. They have a binder full of very specific plans for 5 years out. And I think that is kind of an exercise in futility because you have no idea what the financial picture is going to be like. Sorry. Did you see that? My thumbs up.
Can you not turn that off?
I did turn it off. Oh, no, I didn't. I thought I had it turned off. Okay, I'll have to edit that. It's really an exercise in futility to plan too far out because, listen, you may not even be alive 5 years from now. I don't mean to be morbid, but...
Wow, this just took a big downer turn. Man.
I mean, you may not... The pastor may not be the same. uh, the financial situation you don't know. No one saw COVID coming, and you couldn't have planned for that in your 5-year plan. And so we recommend have a 5-year vision that has some contours to it. You know the kind of church you want to be in 5 years, but then plan in these 1-year stretches. And so that's what we're trying to help you focus on right now is plan in 1-year stretches.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Because the vision should be bigger. It should be meatier, and it should take more than a year. But in 1 year, I think what you're trying to say, Scott, things change. So
Things
work
change.
through this
Hey,
year, and then next year, when you make next year's plan, you can make the adjustments that you needed from what went wrong or different this year.
it is what I said a lie. I'm just saying. Anything can
It
happen.
was feeling a little eat, drink, be merry for tomorrow. We might all be gone.
It's good. It's good to what is it? What does the Bible says? Teach me to number my days. And we should live with a constant awareness. And also, what is in the New Testament? We're told, was it James who says, you shouldn't say, "I'm going to go to such and such town and do such and such
That's right.
thing." You should say,
The
"If the
Lord
Lord
wills.
wills."
Yeah.
And I think we don't take that advice to heart. We don't take that instruction to heart as churches. We either don't plan at all, which is also foolish, or we over plan, not recognizing that we're not really in control anyway. So today we're focusing on that 1-year sprint. How can we make good plans for the next year?
There we go. All right. Well, let's jump in then. And so this is not overly complicated either. I mean, we've got 4 things. It's a little bit higher level. We're not getting into the nitty gritty of exactly what it would look like for your church, but I think these 4 things, if we kind of keep this high level focus as you're working through your planning, then I think it might give you an edge on finding greater success. So the first one is to stay mission focused. You're like, oh gosh, this is definitely the Church Revitalization podcast because these guys cannot shut up about mission. And you'd be right if you said that. Mission, if we don't begin planning with the mission in mind, you're automatically shooting at a target blindly, because the mission is so important. If we're not planning to improve, to me, every year in making and maturing disciples of Jesus, the scriptural mandate for the church, then what are we doing? Why are we doing this at all? So, but remaining mission focused, the thing that happens with this for you as pastor, high level leader, ministry leader, whoever you are listening and watching, the thing about mission is it's not just for the church. It's not just for you. It's for the people that you lead. And mission clarity and continual mission communication is vital in maintaining the direction. So when you incorporate it into your annual planning, it sets you up to be able to continuously make sure all of your team stays mission focused. And that's going to drive every decision, from the biggest decisions to the smallest decisions. We have to constantly be running our decision making and our planning through our mission filter first. That what we do is strategic in achieving this big and primary goal. So staying mission focused is vital. Don't enter into a planning time and a planning session with your team without restating it and making sure that that's your compass heading.
Well, how many times have you been on staff at a church, potentially, listener, or you came on staff at a church, you rolled on, and you knew that the church had a mission statement because it's on the bulletin or was on the website when you applied. But then when you get in there, you ask, like, how much are we using this mission statement? And people are like, oh, we don't really ever talk about it. That doesn't happen overnight. You don't go from, we created this mission statement, to no one ever talks about the mission statement in a day. You slowly roll that way by never bringing it up in your planning. And so it shouldn't just be this once a year that we're bringing it up. As you were saying, AJ, this constant communication of the mission really matters. But especially when you come into a planning season, you want to be certain that you are realigning around that, because if you don't, what tends to happen then is we start chasing what sounds cool or what feels urgent or what feels on fire, and not necessarily, okay, is this a thing? Actually, I was just having a conversation. Here's a little anecdote. Working with this church in Nebraska, they're doing an incredible job, like an amazing job at revitalization. They're in a rural part of Nebraska, but they are growing and they are reaching new people every month. It's fantastic. There was a question that they asked me in our implementation coaching meeting yesterday about service times. They had made one adjustment to their service times, but they're talking about making another adjustment to their service times. And the conversation started to digress a little bit towards preference. Well, would people go for this or not go for this, and such and such. And I just stopped and I said, hold on a minute. We should only be thinking about a change like this in light of the mission. And we have to frame the dialogue around that. Which service time best sets us up to accomplish our mission to make immature disciples? If we start with preference, it will devolve into preference. If we start with mission, we might have a different outcome. And so I was giving some advice on how we can manage change and beta test things and get feedback. And it's not that preference plays no role, but we should lead with mission first. Then we can consider preference after the mission. So, and this is a church that's doing really well, AJ. They are thinking about mission, but when it came to this thing, once that your emotions get involved, and then you start to deviate from mission and you start to think about preference. And so it has to be constant. It has to be all of the time. If we go, hold on, pause. Why are we even discussing this? How does this relate? And only once you've gone through that mission filter first can then you start to address other factors like preference.
Yeah, that's good. And so I think you brought emotion. I'm gonna segue us into point number 2, and that's don't overwhelm. Don't overwhelm yourself. Don't overwhelm your team and your church. And emotion, I think, plays a role in this. So especially, I think in churches that maybe are new to strategic planning and having that rhythm of planning, it's maybe even your first year that you're doing this, and you get your leaders together and you're like, let's be intentional next year. And there's be an excitement perhaps around that. And emotions can begin, especially maybe if you've even found maybe some growth and success this year in some things that you've tried, and you're kind of charged up. You're like, let's go into next year strong, everybody. And we create this huge list of things that we want to do, and we're excited about it. And the emotion of that can blow that list up into something that is way too big, way too much to try to take on. It's super exciting right now, and it will be in January and February and then March. And then as the year goes on, we're like, oh my gosh, we're not going to get half of this stuff done. Don't overwhelm yourself with that.
Yeah.
Only take on what you need to. I would put needs above wants. Take on what you need to make some strategic improvements. And we'll get a little more specific to that in our next point. But don't take on so much that you're going to end up self-defeating in lowering morale and momentum as the year goes on, because you're seeing more failure than success. Better to plan less, more impactful things than just a lot of things that would be awesome if we got them all done. And we see this play out. We've seen it happen. And this is definitely a less is more situation.
For sure. I mean, I'll continue with this anecdote actually with this church, because it's fresh on my mind from yesterday's meeting. In talking about the service change, even I said, mission aside, this particular church has had to take on a lot of change, and I don't want to give too many details about them and air all that, but they've out of necessity had to change names and all kinds of things, right? And I said, this is an ancillary issue, the service time. Maybe don't even discuss it till next year. The appetite, if people are excited because things are going well, you can reach a limit though. Even if things are good, people have a limit for how much change they're willing to tolerate. And so you might just want to go, hey, is this a discussion that we need to table till next year when we've sort of reset our change tolerance level? Or perhaps if we're going to make a change, now's the best time to do it because people have an openness and receptivity to change that they maybe wouldn't have a year from now. So you kind of have to know your congregation and know your team. But these are the kinds of discussions you need to be having. Like, let's gauge our openness to change. Just because there's a low openness to change doesn't mean we shouldn't do anything. It just means we need to be strategic and smart about what we're going to do, and we shouldn't press the gas too much. If you go from 0 to 100, you might just totally destroy your opportunity for real change. And we say this to churches all the time. True, deep change comes from doing the right things the right way for a long time. And you can totally sabotage genuine deep change by taking on too much or too big of a decision too fast. So be intentional. Take the long view as in regards to change and division, and make sure that you execute well on the things that you can actually get done within a 1-year time frame.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, thinking through this also, I mean, I know we were just saying, I don't need to plan more than 1 year out. An instance in which you do, of course, as we said, the vision is going to be longer term, 3, maybe 5 years out on some bigger vision things. But thinking about what are maybe some of our tougher decisions we're going to have to make that could be easier in subsequent years after gaining momentum and seeing progress. And something like maybe a significant service change, or even God forbid, a style change in worship. These are the kinds of things that after gaining some momentum, maybe seeing growth in the church, real great improvement in gospel expansion in your city, and things are really feel like they're really happening. People are maturing. That's a way easier conversation to have a year from now, whenever we can go, look at how far we've come in these really specific and meaningful areas. And we think now making this change will really help improve that even more. That's going to be an easier conversation to have than year one, when we don't have a track record of success or improvement or growth, to be talking about things that might be more controversial and difficult to achieve. So maybe put off to year 2, year 3, something that you don't need to do this year. Let's do something that's going to be more incremental and not significant.
Yeah, it's only in rare circumstances where we would advocate throw the Hail Mary, throw the long pass this year. In almost every circumstance, we'd go, take the long view. How can we work our way in that direction? Know where you want to go, but it's like a road trip. You got to drive 1,000 miles. When I was in college, I live here in Tennessee, and my family lived in Texas and in Wisconsin, and it's like 1,000 miles from my house, from where I live to either of those places. And when I was young, I would often be like, all right, I'm going to wake up at 3 a.m. and I'm going to do the whole thing in a day. And it's going to be a long trip. And then you get there and you're miserable. And it takes like 2 days to really to feel like a human being again. You can kind of bounce back from that when you're 19, but now no way. There's no shot. If I was driving to Texas, I would just do it in 2 days. And then that would be fine. And so I think some churches think, we've got to get the whole thing this year. We got to drive all 1,000 miles in the next year. And you
Mhm,
may be
mhm.
able to do that, but even if you do, there will be back end consequences to that. There'll be like withdrawal feelings and bounce back syndromes and all kinds of things that aren't going to be healthy for you. So here's the
Yeah.
long view.
Ooh, man, I did that too. I did the babies in the minivan, Dallas to Minneapolis, and the idea was, let's leave at night before the kids would normally go to sleep
Hmm.
and just pull an all-nighter. And I did it, and we pulled it off, and it did not go as planned, and it and it
Because
was a
no one
lot of
sleeps well in the
recovery.
car. Yeah. And then you get there and you're
Uh,
miserable. You feel bad
yeah,
for, yeah.
yeah. That was the one and only year we did that. After that, we were like, forget it. We're gonna get there. We're gonna be awake during the day. We're gonna sleep at night in a normal bed,
Well,
and
we learned this
everybody
going
will
overseas. It's
be
like plan one day in between when you get there and when you have to
yeah,
be on, when you have to really do something. Because if you have to get there and go, you are not going to be at your best. You're going to be somewhat groggy. So
yeah. As poor as we are as a nonprofit, it's worth the extra $120 for another hotel night to recover and be ready to work and be fresh.
yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly.
And that is a subtle plug for contributing to the mission of the Malfirst Group at
Malfirstgroup.com/donate.
malfirstgroup.com/donate.
Yeah.
All right. Our next point is to be specific and strategic about what we are going to work on. So you're like, all right, guys, you just said don't take on too much, stay mission focused. So what exactly, how do we then choose? Because there's 25 things we would love to do next year. How are we going to narrow that down? So here's how we do it. Discipleship in the church is not a thing the church does, it's everything the church does. Maturing people to become disciple makers. This is our big picture goal. Make disciples of Jesus, mature them up. We typically see that expressed out in the church in what we call a discipleship pathway. 3, 4, 5 steps that we encourage people to do. Just a small handful of things that are the most important things you can engage within the church. We do our planning around those things. So if we focus on our primary big picture strategic goals for next year around each step of our pathway, then we will have then invested the majority of our time into the most important things in our church. It gives us a natural planning structure so that we are seeking specific improvement in the areas of our ministry that we have the greatest engagement in and that we believe would be the greatest value for people to invest their time in as we go throughout the year. So this gives us a natural way of not overwhelming ourselves, being very specific and strategic. And then the huge upside is at the end of that year, we look back and we go, wow, the key areas of our church that we invest the most money in, that we have the most manpower invested in, that we have the greatest communication invested in for people are the areas that we saw the greatest improvement.
Mhm.
And you'll be so glad you did that because again, stepping up to the next level of big picture 30,000 foot view, well, we stayed on mission and we also made progress towards our vision.
Yeah.
So being specific and strategic, we are recommending to you today, align the work that you plan for next year around improvement in each step of your discipleship pathway. If you don't have a discipleship pathway, go to malfirstgroup.com and reach out to us because we want to have a conversation, talk about how we can help you do that.
Yeah. This is so critical, AJ. I was just at a church in the last little bit and heard something from the stage. This is not a church we were working with, but heard something from the stage about, if you want to do this program, if you want to start this ministry and you want to start that ministry and you want to start this, hey, we'd love to see you do this. And I just thought, why? Why are we saying this? Why are we saying we want to say yes to everything? How is that helpful? And I know the heart behind what was being said was, hey, we want
Yeah.
you to use your giftedness that God has given you to do kingdom work. But we can say that in a way that doesn't communicate that we're going to say yes to every single opportunity that crosses our path, because not
Mhm.
every opportunity that crosses your path is the right one. And even Jesus expressed this, like, not every ministry opportunity that he could take on did he take on. He only took on what the Father gave him to do. And so you've got to discern that. Like, what is it that we have discerned is the pathway for us to disciple people to become fully mature followers of Jesus? And let's invest our efforts in that. There's a certain amount of effort that goes into just simply maintaining that level of ministry. What are we going to do that pluses up that ministry, or improves that, or streamlines it in some way, or makes it more efficient, or makes it better, or makes us more clear in our communication, or encompasses digital ministry in a new way, or leads to innovation in that particular realm? Those kinds of questions, and being really laser focused, AJ, rather than having an openness to anything, which is a pathway to uh,
Mm.
inefficiency, poor discipleship
Confusion.
outcomes, confusion,
Mhm.
um, you know, uh, really not being able to maximize your budget because it's being bled out in small increments. There's no upside to saying yes to everything.
No, yeah, for sure. Yeah, and again, we get it. We kind of get the heart behind that, or the idea behind that, and maybe a bit of idealism, but it just doesn't play out in the real world. It's very difficult for leadership to manage and to maintain. And I think just as as much as it sounds like it would gather everybody, I think it leaves more people left behind. Um, because there's going to be, and it probably breaks down like the 80-20 thing. It's probably going to be 20% of the people that are like, everybody's kind of doing their own thing, and they're maybe finding personal growth and real great engagement. And then the bunch of people that are like, what? It seems like everybody's got their own ministry. I'm not sure what mine would be.
Actually, I think
Where,
a lots of times, AJ, the opposite happens. People get excited about starting their own thing, and then only 3 people show up, and they're like, "Wow, why is no one coming to this?" Well, because we
yeah,
have 100 other options that we could choose from, and we couldn't possibly say yes to everything, even if we wanted to. Um,
yeah, yeah. Yeah, we have to get comfortable with encouraging people to do things on their own. I mean, so part of this is good because if somebody
right?
has
You want
reached
to
a level
go
of
do you don't
maturity,
we don't need a motorcycle ministry. Like,
that's
go
go
ride
do it.
motorcycles with your church friends. It's fine. It
God
doesn't
be
need
with
a it
you.
doesn't need a name and a budget. Just go
That's
do
right.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it actually is a good problem to have, but it gets mismanaged because if somebody has become mature enough where they're thinking, I want to lead a ministry, I want to encourage people, I want to do something, go do it. It doesn't have to become a part of your church, but it's hard for pastors to go, oh, okay, it's hard for them to say no to that,
Hard to say no.
and
Yeah.
yeah, but you're better off saying no, but be encouraging. I mean, like, yeah, I'd love to, help you plan for that so that you can go do that. Um, because it's better and I hate to say this, it's better for the organization, it's better for the church as a whole to stay focused on where the church needs to be and encourage people at the individual level. We've got a series of umbrellas here, Scott. We've got Jesus up here. We got the overarching umbrella is Jesus and his mission. Below that, we might have a denomination / association level of mission. Your church may or may not have that. But underneath that, we've got the individual, local assembly church, and then below that, we've got the individual. And there needs to we have to maintain some separation of that and think about at what level we are in the planning that we're working on. And I think the church gets out of its lane sometimes. The pastor, church leadership need to stay in our lane. Keep focused on the church and how we're going to mature people within our thing without getting into their business of what God could call them to do out in their own time and space, at work, at school, in their neighborhood, whatever that might be. And I think That's what happens. We get that bleed over down into the individual level when we should stay focused at the church level.
Yeah, that's good. All right, our last point here. So we've said if we want to plan, we want to stay on mission. Make sure we focus on that first, and that's not just a platitude. Like, we really need to do that. We need to be sure that we are setting goals that don't overwhelm us. They need to be things we can actually get done within a reasonable time frame. Number 3, we need to be specific in the strategies that we select, and then we don't say yes to everything, but only say yes to things that align with our discipleship pathway and build towards our vision. And then finally, this last point, we want to define and measure success. How can you know if you're winning if you don't know the rules of the game? And so what we talk about when we work with churches is we talk about setting one specific measurable goal for each step in your discipleship pathway. That's a way to it should be something that's output oriented, but that's a way to make sure that we're actually winning. Now, we would encourage you to use, we didn't come up with this, I would encourage you to use the 4 disciplines of execution formulation for a goal, which is from X to Y by when. And here's why. Goals need context, AJ. You can't just say, well, the example I use with churches all the time, I'll say, is 65 miles an hour, is that fast or slow? Driving on an interstate in Texas, you're going to get run over.
A little slow.
A little slow. If you're driving in my neighborhood, I'm going to call the cops, right? Your goals need context. So you need to, that's why from X to Y shows a starting point and then a goal point. If you just said, I want to do X by this time, compared to what? How is that? Is that more than last year? Is that less than last year? Is that, how much more is that than last year? How much less is that than last year? I need to know if that's fast or slow. And then we don't care if you hit that goal or not. I always tell churches, like, I'm not going to lose any sleep whether or not you hit that goal, but I still want you to measure it, because then that tells me, are we going fast or slow? Are we moving closer towards our vision or not? Do we need to put more energy into this? Or is the level of energy from last year a sufficient amount of energy for next year? It's just information. And so we need to not get too concerned about our goals. We shouldn't place our worth in our goals or any of those things, but they're good to have because it's good information, and good information can lead to good decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, back on the, point 2, don't overwhelm. Don't set unrealistic goals for yourself either. I mean, set something reasonable, a stretch goal, something that we need God's help in, but not, you're not going to double your church this year. It's unlikely. I wouldn't set that as a goal, though it could happen.
It could happen.
But sometimes we don't even get into maybe something that's very easily measured. I mean, your goal for Sunday school shouldn't be improve Sunday school next year. That's not a good goal. Now, the result may be improving Sunday school. That in itself is good, but that doesn't really give you a target. It doesn't give you any specificity that you need to work on that and to break that down into bite-sized pieces that you can take on.
Well, and what would improvement look like? How could you quantify that?
Right. Yeah. Where are we starting from? Where do we want to get to? What are the issues that we have right now? What are the specific things that we think, if we improve, would increase engagement, or
we don't have enough class opportunities, or we don't have enough leaders, or we don't have what's the breakdown, what's the problem? And then maybe I'm just trying to address concerns or pushback people would have. Any goal you set isn't going to tell the whole story. Of course it's not. It's just a snapshot to tell us something. And I think some churches are so afraid of maybe their identity being caught up in a number or a goal that they avoid goal setting entirely, which then you miss all the good things that come from setting goals. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
our goals really matter because they help us make good decisions, but we can't become so enwrapped in our goals that we lose sight of the mission. And so it's learning to measure that balance and recognizing that that's what leadership is. So
Mm.
much of leadership starts with leading ourselves, managing our own emotions, managing our own thinking, managing our own attention. And then what happens in our organizations and in our churches follows that, our ability to manage ourselves. And so don't be so afraid of your identity being wrapped up in a goal that you don't set the goal. Um,
Yeah.
so,
And don't be afraid of failure either.
yeah.
Because sometimes, so here's a personal thing that I fall victim to sometimes, and it's not trying something unknown because of a lack of potential success in it. And so, I mean, and I think that's hard sometimes. And I think to some people that sounds ridiculous. Like, why wouldn't you just try and see? And you know what? That actually, I think, is absolutely the right attitude. And a
Well,
lot
I
of
think
times
this
I
is
am
the
trying.
dynamic in our working relationship is because I'm up for anything, just about. Like
Yeah.
I'm way
Hmm.
on the risk side for the most part. I'm not the most risk taking person. I have my limits, but I'm less risk averse than you are. That's right.
Yeah.
So I think when you and I are working through things, I'll have to say, what's the worst that can happen? Like, let's lay out the worst case scenario. Worst case
Hmm.
scenario is X, Y, Z happens. And C, that's actually not that far from where we are right now. We're not that much worse off.
Yeah.
Therefore,
Right.
all of the upside is with this risk, and there's not that much downside.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, I guess for a little bit more peeling back the covers, peeling back the layers of you and I working together, and our the nature of our ministry. Sometimes things do cross our path, Scott, and we're like, we could do this. It's custom, the specific thing, and then I'm like, I don't think that's mission focused.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
there may be a risk element to it, but the primary driver in saying no is because it might be a little too much on the edge of our mission. So
Yeah,
we
that's how you
absolutely
push
do
me
have
and go,
to.
should we really do that? Like,
Yeah.
yeah. So we push each other a little bit, I think, and it's good. And so maybe that's
Hmm.
also some good advice. Maybe a bonus point here would be who's on your team. You know, if you are someone who is naturally the gas, you need someone who can apply some brakes. If you are the person who is the brakes, you need someone who's willing to apply the gas. And
Hmm.
I think you and I are both gas and brakes in our own ways, and I think they balance. In our working dynamic,
Yeah,
they balance each other.
slightly different, but
Yeah.
yeah, you're right. Hmm.
But you need that. You need that in a ministry, on an elder team, on a staff team. You need that mix. That will help you with your planning too.
Yeah. Yep. Well, I think this is a good manageable framework, Scott, for our listeners and our viewers to maybe go into this next year. Not Don't feel overwhelmed about planning. Take these four things, talk about it with your team, and see what you can do for next year. Give it this is the time that the more risk adverse person is telling you, take a little risk, set some goals, and work with your team on this. It's okay if you don't get it right next year. And if you need help, give us a call. We'd love to at least have a conversation with you and go, that's a good idea, or yes, don't do that, maybe try that. We love having those conversations. So um, you can reach us by going to malfirstgroup.com. There's a couple of ways you could reach out. While you're there, if you click over to /216, that's where today's episode is, malfirstgroup.com/216. And you can also click on that donate button up there. Mentioned it earlier. We need a lot of support. We carry our ministry around the world, and we need your partnership to continue to make that happen and to produce things like the Church Revitalization podcast, which we love doing with you. And we'll do it again next week, and that's when we'll be back with you. Thanks for joining us.